Thank you for taking the time to come. We're going to have a few presentations today, and then we'll ask questions and so forth. And at the very end, we'll have some public comment if anyone wants to comment on anything. And please, if you do, just come on up and, we're happy to hear. And really, we want to hear what you have to say because it's very important. The next thing we have to do is all these meetings are going to be recorded, and that way people can watch them and go back when this is over and it moves forward on down the line in whatever direction is going to take place. And so that's very good. The last meeting we had, we thought was going to be recorded, and something happened and it was not. So for those of you that were here for the first meeting, I'm going to go through the same process as far as introductions with everyone that's here and let them just introduce themselves and make a short statement, and then we'll get started. I apologize if you have to hear it again and you were here the first time, but I just want to make sure that it's on the record. Mr. Don or Ms. Dina, you want to call the roll, or whoever wants to do it?
Mr. Fitzgerald. Ms. McNair-Prey. Mr. Marone. Present. Mr. Gould. Mr. Belva Sarah.
Here.
Mr. Reno.
Here.
Mr. Thibodeau.
Here.
Dr. Martin.
Here.
Ms. O'Brien.
Here.
Mr. Lagarde. Present. Mr. McHugh. Present. Mr. Allen. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll go, Mr. Fitzgerald, would you go ahead and just make a brief comment, introduction? That way we'll do it again, sir.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Dave Fitzgerald, I'm the councilman from District 2. We have many drainage issues in District 2 as well as throughout the parish. Very pleased to be participating in this discussion and taking a look at these ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Prey.
Margie Vick. I'm with the Sierra Club of Louisiana. I'm the Conservation Projects Coordinator, but I grew up in St. Tammany, and I've lived here most of my life and have seen the changes happen, and that alarms me. I know changes are going to happen, and I know more people are going to come here because it is a beautiful place. But I think that we need to be aware that there is good development and bad development, and not all moving in any direction is progress, and that we need to make sure that as we do progress and as new people coming to the parish and new homes are built and businesses, that they're built in an intelligent design, an intelligent way that alleviates flooding from them as well as from older homes that have been here before, and that we just need to really work at doing a better job of planning our future. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Paul Marone.
Thank you, Mr. Loreno. Paul Marone. I'm a native of St. Tammany Parish, born and raised here. I'm a land use attorney and have worked for the last 20 years in a variety of land use cases, excuse me, here in St. Tammany Parish and really throughout the Gulf Coast region. And I just appreciate the opportunity to have a voice here on this work group, and hope to be able to bring a good balance between the enforcement of these ordinances with respect for the rights of the landowner, as well as for the concern of any surrounding neighbors.
Thank you.
Good
Mr.
evening.
Belva Sarah.
Good evening. My name is Gene Belva Sarah, Parish Councilman from District 9. I had served years ago on the Zoning Commission and the Planning Commission. I chaired the Planning Commission when we passed what was known as the larger lot size. We went from 60 by 120 to the 90 by 140. There's a lot of heck raised, and it was raised because the concern that the Planning Commission had and the staff had was flooding because of the development coming on so fast back then in the early to mid-90s. If any of you here were long enough, you remember the school system, having schools of more portables than you can count. We were successful in getting that passed, and eventually with the The new zoning classifications were established and lot sizes, things have gotten better. But the concern is that we need to be able to look at what is going to happen in the future. What has already has happened. We now have to find ways to do some retrofits, like in my district, as I was talking to one engineer just a few minutes ago. Where I live, my district is essentially built out, but we still have flooding problems, not caused by development, by the West Pearl River, when it was made a scenic river back in the late 1980s to prevent barge traffic on the West Pearl, where we're paying a heavy price, where there are subdivisions from, if you go to District 6 all the way down to I-10 south. Water is not getting out of the subdivisions the way it did many years ago. I have streets now where there is flooding that never had flooding 10 years ago. And hopefully when we look at this ordinance, we can find some corrective actions.
Thank you. My name is Mike Reno. I'm councilman in District 4 and at the present time chairman of the St. Tammany Parish Council. And I'll come back to my opening remarks in just a minute. Mr. Thibodeau.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Jean Thibodeau. I am a licensed engineer, 23 years experience, 18 years licensed, lifelong resident of St. Tammany Parish in Council District 2, and actually was the parish engineer and director of engineering and worked for the parish for 10 years, from 1995 to 2006.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
John Martin, I'm the president of the Goodby Civic Association, and we're in the northwest part of the parish in the Tchefuncte floodplain for the most part, and we are having great difficulties with flooding, and I'm very, very interested and have been concerned to get good development throughout the parish, safe development, so that people that buy homes don't turn around and find those homes flooded and lose their property. And I'm very happy to have been asked to be on this committee. This ordinance that we have, 6066, is a very important ordinance, and we would like to hear from anybody in the audience that has things to say about the ordinance covers fill and water in developments, and anybody have things that they want to say, we would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Ms. O'Brien.
Hi, I'm Maureen OBrien. I am the parish council person representing District 10. I'm also an at-large member of the Republican Parish Executive Committee. I'm here because I have the same concerns as everybody else. We want to make sure that we have good development, where we're conscientious about any potential drainage issues. I sincerely appreciate the transparency that this is providing, and I love the fact that it's giving an opportunity for everyone on all sides to have a voice in this process, and I think that's very critically important.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Lagarde.
Thank you, Chairman Reno. My name is Ross Lagarde. I'm pretty much a lifelong resident of St. Tammany Parish, having grown up in Goodby. I'm a local attorney. I'm also on the Republican Parish Executive Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and participate in this process. Look forward to all of the presentations and then our continued work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McHugh.
My name is Kelly McHugh. I'm a resident, have been practicing engineering and surveying in the parish for approximately 40 years. So I hope I can add some historical perspective to the parish's development and the development of their rules and regulations on drainage and development.
Thank you. Mr. Allen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Matthew Allen. I'm a lifelong resident of St. Tammany. I grew up on the Little Tchefuncte River, and I've seen every flood since 1973 on it. Building properly in the floodplains is very important. My family has never had flooding of a house because we understood what was going on when we started building back in the 70s. I'm president of the Little Tchefuncte River Association and a certified floodplain manager. I really appreciate the opportunity to assist to this panel.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Watson from Engineering Department.
Jay Watson with St. Tammany Parish, parish engineer. I've been with the parish since 2010. I don't know, is the microphone on? I think.
1 second.
And
You got it?
Can get the volume up. Should be on.
okay. Jay Watson with
There
St.
you
Tammany
go.
Parish, parish engineer. Been
Thank
with
you.
the parish since about 2010. Just here to assist with any questions that y'all have.
Thank you. Ms. Sarah?
I'm Erin Bavono. I'm the Assistant Director of Development. I am here because Mr. Fontenot could not be here this evening, and I am here to assist where I can. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, I'll go over, I had some opening remarks for the last meeting, and I'll go ahead and read them again just for the record. Committee members, I would like to first thank each of you for dedicating your time to participating in this process. The resolution of this issue is critical for our parish, and I appreciate the time and effort you're given and will continue to give. Within this work group, we have a diverse range of perspective to share and consider, and I feel confident that we can use this to our advantage and create a positive path forward on this important issue. Although I was unable to attend, I have viewed the video of the November 15th public meeting several times, and my resulting perception is that this issue is really much more than just an amendment to an ordinance. Simply stated, our residents and business owners should not live under a shadow or concern that their property could flood at any moment. We all realize that nature cannot be controlled, but we can use knowledge and experience to prevent property damage from occurring as a result of regular anticipated rainfall. Our parish leadership, engineers, and developers are going to have to work together to reach that goal. Again, I realize that we have a variety of perspectives to share, and we will debate this issue fairly, openly, and with civility to determine whether or not the ordinance should be amended. After the committee debates and public input has been considered, I will ask each member of this group to provide their opinion on whether or not we should amend the ordinance, and those answers will be recorded for the parish council to consider. In the interest of full disclosure and transparency, I'd like you to all know that a formal recommendation expressing the majority opinion of this group will be submitted to the council. Following the completion of this committee's task, anyone in this group, as well as any member of the public, will be welcome to provide their ideas and recommendations for flood prevention efforts and how we can work together on issues. All information received will be provided to members of the parish council for review, and the deciding vote will be taken at a regular council meeting. Regarding the overall flooding issue, it is obvious from the public meeting that was held on November 15th that there are many concerns and issues related to flooding in the parish. I want to be sure it's very clear that we are not here to solve all of those issues in this group at this time. While there will be discussion about the bigger picture, our only task to determine whether or not specific ordinance we are considering should be amended or should remain as is or made stronger. That's what the goal of this group is right here. And I believe it will go into a more detail of what we need to do moving forward. So I just wanted to make that statement for the record. Thank you. We have some presentations tonight that I think will be very informative, and I'm looking forward to all of them. Is Mr. Jason Ellis here? Jason, would you come on up, sir? And if you have something you'd like to pass out, we can get that. Hey, Don. That's Sean here. I know. We're going to get you right. We have it now, sir. Jason, we have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate y'all allowing me to present tonight. My name is Jason Ellis with SLD Engineering and Surveying. I've been working in the engineering field since 2005. I have a BS from LSU. My major study was in hydrology, so I'm more of a hydraulics engineer than some. I represent a firm that specifically works for the largest residential real estate developer in the state. We have about 65 projects in the state, various mixed-use projects, commercial, residential, it doesn't matter. We also have projects in Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas. We have 2 projects in St. Tammany Parish right now, and I had started by thinking, you know, what would benefit you guys the most, because I know y'all are meeting, I think, until June, and you're going to hear a lot of information. So what I've done is gone through and kind of summarize floodplain regulations from around the state, specifically mostly in the Florida parishes, because their topography and the hydrology in the Florida parishes is very similar in St. Tammany that it is in Livingston or East Baton Rouge. You kind of have the same relief going on in the parish, drops towards the lakes or whatnot. So with that being said, I'm going to start with the first slide. We're going to talk about 2 things tonight: compensatory storage, which is also called field mitigation. Compensatory storage is the acronym used by FEMA, and it is required in a floodway. A floodway is a special area within the flood hazard area where development has to provide a no-rise certificate to be allowed to be built. In this case, I don't believe, do y'all have any floodways in St. Tammany? I haven't seen any yet. I don't think so. Well, floodways is a way to really specifically study areas in a lot more context and figure out whether fill will actually rise within the floodplain, within a restricted area within the floodplain. Some communities adopt more restrictive standards that regulate the amount of fill or buildings that can displace floodwater in the flood fringe. You can see I provided you guys a little detail of compensatory storage. This comes out of a compensatory storage manual out of Nebraska, and it shows a little excavator pushing dirt on one side of the floodplain, and then on the other side of the floodplain, you're cutting that same amount of dirt out. So it's really a simple hydraulic concept. You get in a bathtub, the water goes up, you get out, it goes down. And so compensatory storage is actually a higher regulation. FEMA doesn't require it outside the floodway. But in St. Tammany, you do have that higher standard because you've asked everybody within the floodplain for compensatory storage or fill mitigation. The next slide shows a map of the communities that participate in what the National Flood Insurance Program calls the community rating system. Y'all are, most of the council members, I'm sure, are probably pretty familiar with this system. Every so many years, the FEMA comes in and certifies that your ordinances and regulations that you've adopted pass, and they give you a class. And that class translates to flood insurance reductions for the participating communities. And you can kind of see on the side a breakdown in the different classes, whereas a community that just is enrolled in an FIP in the CRS program starts with a 9. The lower and lower your rank goes, the more reduction in flood insurance premiums you get. Now, I'm not a flood insurance expert per se. I have been a council member for a city in the past, and I have walked us through that CRS program with my engineers in my city. And so I'm fairly familiar with ordinances and regulations. I've authored some unified development codes here in the state. And I always try to encourage communities that aren't participating in the CRS program to become participants because of those flood insurance rate discount benefits. The reason I'm talking about that on the next slide is that the CRS credits what they call Activity 430 credit for higher regulatory standards, and that's protection of floodplain storage capacity. Your fill mitigation ordinance will qualify and I'm sure it's being given credit already, but these slides right here, these 2 pages, come straight out of that CRS manual on how to get credit for flood storage capacity from the CRS FEMA manual. And you'll see I kind of highlighted a little piece of language in their example regulatory language. They're basically given 80 points where regulations prohibit fill within floodplains. So if you wanted to straight up say nobody can ever fill in the floodplain again, all the floodplain is useless, you could enact that ordinance. You have that power. Nobody would ever be able to do anything in the floodplain with fill-wise, and all development was shut down within any flood zones. Now, you know, in areas like in Colorado or something like that, where you have a lot of high relief and valleys, very short valleys and very small floodplains, that makes sense, right? But in Louisiana, like the community where I come from and near Baton Rouge, where we saw more than 50% of our structures flooded in 2016, doesn't make sense, right? Like, you know, putting that onerous burden on everybody living within the floodplain would basically stop any kind of growth of the parish or city. And the reason, and I'll answer your questions in just a second. Let me get through the slides.
Let him go through and just make a note of what anybody who wants a question answered.
Thank you. And the reason I say that is, you know, and FEMA even recognizes that, right? They also give you 70 points when regulations require that new developments provide compensatory storage. Compensatory storage is not something unique to St. Tammany Parish. In fact, in several slides, I'll show you how other field ordinances within the state of Louisiana are worded. And I'll also tell you that compensatory storage is used throughout the country and in the world. The UK, Australia, they all have regulations that govern compensatory storage. So it's not like some you know, foreign thing, you know, fill mitigation. A lot of people do it. A lot of people regulate it a lot of different ways. FEMA notes in their regulatory language that no area below the water line of a pond or other body of water can be credited as a compensating excavation. And we should all know that, right? If you look at a pond and there's a water level in that pond and it's there all the time, it can't be occupied by any of that flood water. So that's kind of a give me. But that is some information for you. You'll notice too in my slides, I've cited all throughout the slides different links to different resources where you can go download any of these documents and read all the verbiage. On the second page, or the next page, I'm sorry, page 5, the CRS profile activity, I've highlighted activity 430, which is higher regulatory standards, which fill mitigation is a part of, and I kind of highlighted out where St. Tammany ranks versus the rest of the state. This is the latest data that I could access from the CRS website. So it may not be the latest because certifications are done every few years and it's constantly changing. But you can see how many points. The more points you have, the more credit you get in CRS. And you can see how different parishes, different cities within the state all kind of rank. I'll let you guys kind of look at all that. Next page is the Ascension Parish Fill Ordinance, or portions of it. And I specifically highlight in their fill ordinance where they say where lakes are excavated, the volume of dirt removed below the normal water surface of the lake cannot be credited as compensating storage. And that's basically what we just talked about. But I will tell you that every other parish that I'm going to show you, I haven't found a parish yet that will not credit compensating storage above the normal pool level. And I think that's where a clarification on this ordinance kind of evolved from, is trying to figure out, will St. Tammany Parish clarify the ordinance and let engineers know if above the normal pool of water should be credited for fill mitigation. And here we are in a large committee to kind of talk about all that, but I'll continue on. Calcasieu Parish Fill Ordinance, we have projects over there. Detention ponds, where detention ponds are to be excavated, the volume of dirt removed below the normal pool water surface level of the required minimum pond size cannot be credited as compensating fill mitigation volume. We'll flip to the next one. East Baton Rouge Parish Fill Ordinance. It states, for mitigation purposes, no credit shall be given for that portion of the excavation that is lower than the existing channel. And that's pretty typical because as an engineer, when you're designing a pond, the lowest you can get the water surface of that pond is whatever you're discharging the pond into. So, you know, if there's a big ditch next to a development site with a pond, the bottom of that ditch is the lowest I can get that pond elevation to. The water will always kind of just rise from the ditch, and then it'll go back and forth. It'll go into the pond and out of the pond, and that's kind of how that works. Then we go to St. Tammany Parish's Fill Ordinance, and I just highlighted a few. The parish's fill ordinance, you know, I think I support it wholeheartedly. I always support higher regulatory standards. There's no doubt that it does help protect people from losing floodplain storage, and that's what we're talking about with fill mitigation. We're talking about a volume that's allowed to be flooded when a flood event occurs, and it's not at that site. You know, we're not talking about a little 20-lot subdivision sitting over here with a pond, and that site's flooding. We're talking about the 20-acre little subdivision sitting over here, and Chofuncta River's coming, and Chofuncta River, and it starts raining, and, you know, 36, 48 hours later, that water's done traveled for miles and miles and miles, and that's when that flood wave comes. And so the parish's fill ordinance says that soil material in a volume equal to the fill material proposed to be placed on the property is excavated and removed from the property, such that the flood storage capacity of the property is maintained for a 100-year frequency flood event. And that's pretty typical language. The only part of the language that we're here for the clarification of is whether or not the area between the normal water surface pool elevation of a pond and wherever else you want can be counted as storage. So can air, per se, be counted as storage? That was the clarification requested. You can see that all the other parishes that I've mentioned, all the parishes that I have experience with across the state, count from the normal pool elevation up. And I'll tell you that fill mitigation-wise, there's probably only, I could count on two hands how many parishes in the state require fill mitigation. So, you know, don't think that St. Tammany Parish's regulations are below other areas. They're actually, I'm going to show, much higher than anywhere else in the state for a few reasons. Next, we'll talk about detention ponds. Detention ponds are a whole separate stormwater control device than fill mitigation. Detention ponds, although they can occupy and be in the same place and do the same things at different times, they credit different ways. And it really is all about timing, and that is a really complex engineering discussion to have. I'd be willing to talk to anybody about that, but we're talking about some significant modeling and showing how the timing of storms, the timing of flood events, the position of a development within a floodplain, how all that affects, you know, what area is available to be stored by water. Because water doesn't just come down in one dimensional and it just goes that way. It spreads out and it'll flow back and forth in a pond or in a pipe connecting to a ditch. Detention ponds are a water control device, not unique to Louisiana, not unique to the United States, used all over the world. Detention ponds are used to attenuate the peak flow. So on an existing site, you can see in that graph where it says pre-development, you have a peak flow where you can see the discharge kind of caps out at a point. When post-development, if you look at the pink graph, that's basically more water. So why does more water happen? Because you add impervious area. You have roads, you got roofs, you got sidewalks. Those things lead to water running off the site into storm drains, into ponds. Now, if we were to not have any kind of detention requirements, the pink would just keep keep coming out the site, right? So we basically in this graph, you'd almost be doubling the discharge or so from the site. But in a post-development with detention graph, the little blue graph, you're basically trying to make sure that your flow pre-developed is the same as your flow post-developed. And that lends credence to the engineer's mantra of do no harm. You know, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to design sites that do not harm the public. We are not trying to design sites that harm the public, but we're trying to use the knowledge and expertise that we have to make everybody safer, because that's what we want to do for you guys. I got a few definitions of detention and detention volume right there. I got a little cross-section of detention storage and a detention pond, and you can see kind of on the left side that dead storage area is the permanent pool, you know, and that's in a wet pond. In a dry pond, you don't have a permanent pool. It's dry, and the pipe would be all the way at the bottom of the pond to allow all the water to discharge. So for on the next page, we're going to talk about CRS Activity 450, which is stormwater management. Stormwater management is where we talk about detention and peak flow attenuation according to the FEMA manual. They give you design storm credit. So the basic requirement is that peak flow after development must not be increased as a result of the development. You get 60 points if the detention is designed for the 100-year storm. You get 20 points if the detention is designed for a storm larger than the 10-year but smaller than the 100-year storm. And you get 10 points if detention is designed for a 10-year storm. The next page shows St. Tammany's rankings and scores in the CRS program for Activity 450. You can see how many points the parish is getting right now. And I will say that Activity 4, when I call out these activities, there's more than just stormwater regulations in there. There's several sub-activities in there, so don't think that I just don't have the breakdown by specific subtask to point out to you guys. But I am showing you your activity scores as they relate to other parishes and cities throughout the state. And then on the last slide, I have a comparison of detention pond design requirements by parish. You'll notice that Ascension Parish, Calcasieu, East Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Livingston, and Terrebonne Parish all use a 25-year design storm for their ponds or for their peak flow attenuation. In St. Tammany Parish, there's a 100-year design storm requirement and a 25% reduction. And so I'll just go out there and tell you that you can look at that and you can see how high St. Tammany Parish's standards are. I'm not really sure why the ranking from CRS doesn't reflect that, because you guys should be like at the top of the points in CRS, in my opinion. It could be anything. It could just be a recertification needed or something. But having designed and done drainage impact studies throughout the state, I've reviewed drainage impact studies for municipalities. I'll tell you, St. Tammany's is like way up here. And so I just wanted to present kind of this information packet to you guys and let you guys have some more information to make a better decision, hopefully. And I'm here to answer any kind of questions y'all may have about engineering in general or drainage. I also, a real good colleague of mine, Toby Fruge, is here. He's the chairman of the State Floodplain Management Association. He's an engineer with Owen and White. He's here tonight, too, to answer any kind of questions. He wanted me to let you guys know that he's available in the Floodplain Management Association to lend any kind of help. And you guys, if y'all need any kind of technical assistance or whatnot on deciding this ordinance. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ellis. First of all, thank you very much. And would it be possible to have this emailed to us in PDF so
Definitely.
that we could put it on the site for the benefit of the people in the audience that they didn't get to, see it up there?
Yes,
and I would really appreciate that if you don't mind. Secondly, it sounds like you consider St. Tammany Parish has stronger requirements than other parishes in the state. Would that be?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Definitely.
I guess my next question then is, if we have those standards and they're high, what brings the flooding into this picture?
That's a great question. Yeah, my house flooded in 2016. I live in Central, where I was a council member when we flooded, and it was about the same way. I had people basically beating down my door, and I had a town hall 3 days later that was pretty chaotic with FEMA. People thought they were all going to have to raise all their homes or tear them down, and it was chaos. But why do we still flood? We flood because we can't design for God, basically. I mean, we cannot design. Look at Hurricane Harvey, for example, in Houston. Houston County Flood Control District has some of the most stringent regulations ever. Even their DOT has to have stormwater management plans and restrict its flow on a highway project. You've seen it. You go to drive through Houston, you see these huge detention basins, reservoirs. They're designed for 500-year events. Houston still flooded. They got 60 inches of rain in a couple of days. In Central, we got 34 inches of rain in a couple of days. Unfortunately, there's always going to be those events we can't do. Could we design something to fix that? Yes. Could you pay for it? Probably not. And that's typical. I mean, the economics of things has a huge impact on this, right? Like, you can only afford to build so much. Like a developer or a city, like let's say for the parish, they wanted to go build a road. They designed their storm drain system on a 10-year storm. Subdivisions design their storm drain system on a 10-year storm. All those pipes go to a detention pond size for a 100-year storm. Well, guess what? The 100-year storm never gets in there because the pipe only has capacity for a 10-year storm. Why can't we design the pipe system for a 100-year storm? Because we'd have, multiple iterations of massive box culverts running down every street, and you'd spend more money, probably 20 times the amount, on drainage on the side of the road than you would on the road itself. And then, economically, we kind of get to a point to where, is this affordable? Like, does it make sense? And I think that's kind of where we are. The big issue, I know where I live, the Amite River Basin, it's massive. A lot of water comes from Mississippi. A lot of developments happen in the Baton Rouge metro area. A lot of development pre these flood regulations of detention and fill mitigation. That stuff didn't exist in the 70s and 80s. A lot of subdivisions from back then where I live, they are part of the problem, right? Even my own subdivision, we don't have detention ponds in my subdivision. All the water in my subdivision goes straight out into the canal. And I understand citizens that want to come and they say, they want to stop a subdivision from happening. I mean, I get it because they think it's going to hurt them. And, my job as an engineer is to prove that it won't. And can that happen? Yes, I can control something on my brand new site. I can design something in a box and make it work. But can I fix everything else? That the problems that we have, it's from a lack of funding, period. We don't have the tax revenue as a state to address the needs that we have. Texas has way more population, way more tax revenue. They can build massive reservoirs, but even those got overtopped during that Hurricane Harvey. So, I can never look a citizen in the face and say, you're never going to flood. Like, I tell them, go buy flood insurance. I know it saved me. I was in a zone X 4 feet above the base flood, and I flooded. Luckily I had flood insurance, but I'm an engineer, and I understood the risk, and everybody needs to understand that risk. Like, get a flood policy no matter where you live. It doesn't matter if you're in the flood zone or not. So from that, I think it's the economics. That's my opinion. I mean, the economics of how much it would cost to go, let's say we wanted to fix the Chafunkta River. What do we have to do that? Widen it 4 or 5 times its size or create massive reservoirs along it like Houston does? We just don't have the population density to fund something like that. So we have to deal with site-specific problems at the site, at the source. But can we ever go back and fix the existing problems that we have? I don't know. That's a tough one.
Well,
Good question.
And another question is, did you look at the ordinance that we have on the books right now, and then the proposed?
I have. I've looked at both.
What's your opinion?
So my take on it is, and y'all aren't going to like this, but there are times, like in a watershed, and this is pretty heavily documented, that the location within a watershed dictates whether or not a flood event's going to happen at the same time that the peak event happens on the pond. And that's what this is all about, right? Specifically, I have a site in Goodby that the peak event in my ponds happens at hour 14, but the peak event literally from the gauge data of 2 events in 2016 that were basically almost 100-year events, those happened at hour 42. So my pond comes up at 14 hours, and then it discharges back out. But the peak flood wave is still coming, right? So when that peak flood wave comes in my site, does that pond have room for fill mitigation? Will that pond accept the flow over its banks into it to store water? It absolutely will, and I can prove it engineering-wise. And I think that maybe the parish's way should to have the developer's engineer prove the timing of the storm events. Now, if I was in a watershed that was at the top of the basin, is it possible that the travel time of that could occur at the same time, and then that level not be able to be occupied? Yes, but it's all based on engineering and hydrographs and the timing of events, when they happen and their position in the watershed. And so that's why I wish there was an easy catch-all answer, but not in what we're talking about. And what we're talking about, it really should be based on an engineering study done by a certified engineer, not just a checklist item. Now, I will show you that I showed you on these slides that other parishes are all letting people credit the area above the normal pool elevation. And I think that a step in the right direction would be to have an engineering study prove the elevation of the pond and the elevation of the receiving water body or the floodplain mitigation body, right? Because I'm mitigating the Tchefuncte River on a site. It's 5,000 feet away from the Tchefuncte River. Only half my site is below the base flood elevation. So I probably got about 12 inches of fill maybe at the most across the site that I have to mitigate. But the 12 inches of fill, when you have these huge detention ponds that never really get to the 100-year elevation, and then you look at the flood wave and how long it takes to come, you know, what is that area in that pond that should be credited for storage? Can you achieve detention in a pond and storage in a pond at the same time? Yes, you can, but it depends on the position in the watershed and a real engineering study of what's going on. And I wish there was an easier answer than that, but it's really site-specific, and it needs to be studied rather than just a blanket statement.
Let me ask you another question about what you said about engineers looking at it and proving it. What I see happens is we'll have a subdivision being built, and it's all approved, and it moves through the system, and it's built. And then a few years later, we have a flood. And then there's no one else to hold responsible for that. So is there a mechanism in place that says if you design a subdivision and I move into that subdivision and 5 years later it floods and what you proved was wrong, are you liable for that?
Yes, sir. I mean, we have professional insurance. I mean, we're liable for our designs. There's no doubt. Am I liable for an act of God that's beyond the design event? No. Like, is anybody? And so that would be my answer to that. Like, we have engineers designed to a standard. We design a site to a standard. Will that standard be surpassed at some time? That's a probability. Am I responsible for the probability of that? No, I'm responsible for the standard and the ordinance and the code. Now, there's times when I design way above the standard because you're right. I'm on the line. I don't want somebody coming at me. a lot of these jurisdictions that do 100-year, 25-year detention, I mean, I'll do 100-year detention sometimes, just because depending on the watershed, I mean, you really want to be empathetic and try to not harm people around the watershed. And so that's my whole goal is just to understand the regulations and to design to the standards that are set forth. And so that's what we do.
One last question to be very short.
Yes, sir.
In a floodplain, building in a floodplain, is there anybody, any government agency or parish or whatever that requires you to build up rather than fill in?
Build up like elevating,
Yes,
like pier and
elevated
beam?
10, 13 feet,
None that I know of in the Florida parishes require pier and beam construction. It's just, I will tell you that we work with lots of different home builders across the state. Nobody wants to do pier and beam. Nobody will do pier and beam. So, if you want to require it, nothing's going to happen because we can't sell lots because nobody wants to buy lots on pier and beam. Okay. Here's the other problem, though, and I'll tell you what pier and beam that people think is the best thing in the world is, but you still have to grade those lots. You still have to provide roads that won't flood. The road can't be 4 feet. Well, I'm not even talking about sites that are 4 or 5 feet below BFE. There are sites that are too far below the base flood elevation that really that shouldn't be developed. I think we can all agree on that, right? I'm talking about sites that are in the fringes. How do we address that? And so you still have to build your infrastructure up. You still got to detain a 100-year flood event. So if I lift all this property up over here, I got to dig out this massive hole for the 100-year flood event. Plus, and then I got to take that fill. Where am I going to put it? Now you're going to make people just go haul it off out of the floodplain or something. It's going to cost ridiculous amounts of money. So that's my thoughts on the pier and beam. I've asked my guys. I mean, I wish we could do pier and beam, to tell you the truth. But the builders, developers, they don't want to do it. So I'm kind of stuck in a little spot with that.
I thank you, Mr. Allen.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. First off is about the FEMA credits for the fill mitigation.
Right.
I was reading the coordinator manual for it, and apparently we could get more credits if we required them to remove 150%
Yes.
of what they fill.
Yeah, there are higher standards. I think you go up to 1.5 times.
Yeah, so we could earn another half of what we're already earning if we put that in.
Yes.
All right, I appreciate that. Also, I noted that if we require raising 3+ feet above the BFE, we would get more credits also.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, you can get credits all day to shut down anything. Look, but you got to understand that the credits, are they worth not being able to build a school anymore, a fire station, or doing other public civic projects? I mean, these requirements are not just a subdivision. They are everybody. They are you when you go to pull a permit and build your own house, So, it does cost money. The higher you go, it costs money.
One other thing about that. Actually, we live and raise houses. My parents were 11 feet off the ground in the floodplain.
Wow.
So I totally understand living with a canoe tied to the house.
You hear.
You were talking about the detention ponds meter out the water. Now, does that mean that the floodwaters, when they come down to get back in, are metered in also?
In a way, yes.
So,
in a way, at lower flow events, it would, right? But normally, our top of bank of our pond, like in a specific site that I have, the top of bank of the pond is lower than the 100-year flood event. Does that make sense? So it will flow back in the pipe, but then it'll spill over either a spillway or the banks when the higher events happen. So that's how the water gets back in the pond.
But what about for the lower events? I mean, would that also increase the flood levels for lower events because some of the water would have to bypass because it can't fit back up the pipe?
Depends on the topography of the site, right? Like, so maybe the site is already above the 10-year flood event, right? But maybe it's like you see what I'm saying? Like, it's so site-specific that you can't just write a catch-all. There is a possibility of what you're talking about in a lower site, where you're way below the base flood elevation. You try to build all that up. You could do something like that. But, in a site that maybe is only 12 inches, 6 inches below the base flood, it's usually the difference between the 10-year and the 100-year flood elevation is about 1.5 feet, 2 feet. The FEMA flood profiles show you that information. Right. So if you're deeper than maybe 2 or 3 feet, then there's a possibility of that. But if you're already above that 10-year elevation, I don't think that.
And there's one other thing I've been curious about. All scientific studies have errors in them.
Right.
What's the error range for base flood elevations in Louisiana?
That's very technical, because base flood elevations in Louisiana are based off of all kinds of different studies. It's not just some of them are based off of stuff from the 70s, old HEC 1 models, and then HEC 2, and then you got HEC-RAS now, and you got 2D HEC-RAS now, and so. I mean, we've been studying floodplains since the flood insurance program in '78, and studies range all from there. So I couldn't give you a be-all, end-all kind of error in the BFE, because.
Are we talking like in the range of 1 foot or in the range of 4 feet?
I mean, so the way FEMA addresses it is the BFE is the BFE on the latest adopted map, right? And so they'll never admit to any kind of error. I've had clients try to sue FEMA and lose, so I know.
I've tried to get it out of FEMA also.
That game works. Yeah, that's how their game works. Good questions, though. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Martin.
Jason.
Yes, sir. Hey, Doc.
Oh, mic off, mic on. Okay, good seeing you again. That was a very interesting chart and what you explained. When I was in the planning and development office here at St. Tammany, I picked up a brochure that was put out by FEMA, and it had that if you're in a floodplain and you and your house is built raised, for instance, their example was a 2,000 square foot house, that the cost of raising that house in your 30-year mortgage, you would pay off in 3.5 years, and you'd actually have saved $37,000 over your 30-year mortgage.
Right.
Plus, of course, your property wouldn't have been destroyed and things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious as to if you're going to build, and I understand I don't understand all your engineering. I get the general gist of what you were saying. But why wouldn't a developer want to build a house that's in a floodplain on piers? Now, St. Charles Avenue, New Orleans, the houses are built up, and they did that on purpose because they knew they were in New Orleans at the bottom of the Mississippi, and it overflowed. Why wouldn't a developer want to build a house that actually would, because of the cost of FEMA, would save the people $37,000 over the life of the mortgage, and their house would be safe?
That's a good question, Doc. I try to puzzle myself all the time with the developers, because I'm an engineer and we have totally different mindsets, but I work in an office with one all day long.
Right.
I mean, look, I, as much as you, I like the raised floor, older neighborhoods, especially ones, in downtown Baton Rouge. We have some beautiful neighborhoods that are raised floor. And you're right, look at all your old plantation homes, they were all built up on piers. They knew the floods were gonna come. Why do, developers, builders not wanna build subdivisions like that?
Right.
I don't know the answer. I can only say it's gotta be the economics, because nobody in the country, nobody in the country's doing it, right? Like, so, I mean, I look around and I don't see anybody building on pier and beam.
Well, that's the thing about us,
right?
Because when we were given this Bible, which, God help me reading it. But anyway, one of the things that they said in it is that of the 25 Louisiana parishes have 8 of the 25 worst spots
Yeah.
for repeated development.
Repetitive losses. You're talking about repetitive losses, right?
Repetitive losses.
Yep.
Louisiana parishes have
right.
8 of the 25.
We do.
Why wouldn't we engineer
Right.
with that in mind and start saying, look, you're in a floodplain, you need to be up. Because otherwise, and of course we've seen that, in St. Tammany Parish, we had over 1,000 homes flooded. Now, I mean, that's, what, 5,000 people lost property in homes and equity in their houses, and why wouldn't we do that? Engineer for, Mandeville has a requirement that you're elevated if you're building along the shoreline.
Right.
Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we engineer? And I understand you can't, the good Lord's going to do stuff, and you're at His mercy.
I get it.
But why wouldn't we, knowing all of that? And did you get a chance to see Ezra Boyd's study?
I did.
All right. His statement was that, and of course, what we're talking about is for the whole parish.
Right.
In our area, the northwest part of St. Tammany Parish, and I think it's the property you're talking about, that they anticipate in a 30-year span, that property will flood 7 to 9 times. And if it floods 7 to 9 times in a 30-year span, and I don't think Ezra put this next sentence down in there, but he said 1 to 3 of those are going to be catastrophic. Now, if you're flooding 7 to 9 times, you can flip a coin so many times. One, it's going to come up tails. So 1 to 3 would seem to make sense. But why wouldn't people engineer for that and keep the people safe rather than saying, well, we can't help it if it rains and floods at the same time, you're in trouble? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I get what you're saying.
Well, what can you tell me? You basically what you're saying is you're engineering for what they tell you to do.
That's right.
Yes, sir. I understand that.
And I get wanting to do more and more and more and
Right,
more and more.
right,
But
I agree.
as you know, I mean, it's kind of like you going to buy your own house,
Sure.
right? I could deck my house out with the thickest granite,
Right.
48 inches thick,
Right.
and put gold-plated toilets everywhere. But, can we afford it? And
I'd like to see your house.
It don't look like that. It flooded, and I just got finished rebuilding it maybe a year ago. So
Would
look,
you have
I'm
rathered if your house had been raised?
man.
But anyway, I appreciate it, Jason.
Yeah, but
And
I shouldn't have had
You
to
made
do
a
that.
very good presentation.
I appreciate it, Doc.
I really enjoyed what you have, and a lot of
Thank
that
you.
makes sense. What number are we? You said that
Your class.
my eyes are just horrible. You said that 9 is the best and 1 is the worst.
St. Tammany Parish is listed on here as a 7.
7?
Is that right now? Yeah. So East Baton Rouge is a 6. Jefferson Parish is a 6.
So
they're
what
the highest in the
St.
state.
Tammany Parish, as far as the cost, the FEMA cost to
Yeah.
all the people, should be pushing to be a 5, a 4.
Absolutely. You get better discounts for
Yeah.
your community.
Okay.
And there's probably a lot of things besides the 2 things we're talking about. We're just talking
Right.
about storage and detention.
Right.
There's an endless amount of tasks that you can get flood insurance reductions.
Right.
And that's important. So
It
you-
is. It is.
Yeah.
And I appreciate, I couldn't see it. It was little bitty writing, and I've got my glasses, but
I mean,
my eyes are just horrible.
I'll tell you that in East Baton Rouge Parish, there's a dedicated certified floodplain manager, specifically in the Department of Public Works, that handles floodplain management related issues. So he's a PE, He's a floodplain manager, and you may want to think about having the parish, if you have some money, to hire a person to manage your floodplain. They would be responsible for the CRS applications to make sure you're getting the maximum amount of points.
Right.
It's a lot of work, and
Yeah.
FEMA says that it needs to be a full-time person doing
Right.
that. So
Right.
whoever's doing it for your parish is doing a good job right now, because you're probably on the threshold of getting one of the best ratings in the state. So I mean,
Good.
keep it up.
Good. Jason, thank you very much. I do
Thanks, Doc.
appreciate it. You're a good man.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Margie?
Yeah, hi.
Hey,
Thank you for your presentation.
thank you.
First thing I did was, on your little pretty illustration of the floodplain, was draw trees.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm like, unfortunately, when you're bulldozing everything down and clearing out these nice mitigation things,
Well-
you're bulldozing down all the
Well, you have a tree
local
ordinance,
wildlife.
so, you know,
No, we don't.
we could think about trees being there.
But just the point that it does take out the trees that,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
know, and destroys the whole effect of the river. So that's not a good thing, not for me at least. When I started to question you, though, was you said about on the second or third slide, about the 80, if we got an 80, it would be,
Right.
you said repeatedly stops all development. And
Yeah.
it doesn't really stop all development, it just stops fill development, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so
But-
they could still build
But-
pier and beam.
But have you
pier and
seen,
beam-
but have
pier
you
and
seen a
beam.
school built on a pier and beam?
Actually,
and
yeah.
A mall,
You need
a
to travel
shopping center?
down south a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah,
Delma High
yeah,
School,
yeah.
8 feet.
Gold,
Well,
you
I
head
mean-
down towards Golden Meadows and everything too. There's a bunch of them.
I should say the normal form of
Well,
development.
but they're also, down in this area, they're used as areas for people to get into when there is flooding, and so
Right.
they're up, and it gives people a safer place.
Yeah, there's a
to
place for
evacuate
there's
to.
a place for pier and beam and raised floor homes.
So, yeah,
I
there
see
are
'em-
pier and beam,
I
yeah.
see them very typically very close to the floodplain,
Yeah.
to the river itself.
And actually, I was in a very expensive shopping center in Honolulu, Hawaii years ago, and it was all raised. It was parking underneath, and the stores were all up, and
Well,
it was
that's
really
neat.
very sensible. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So, I mean, it can be done. Commercial development as well as residential can be done even without putting in fill. And it can actually make it better for everybody without putting in fill. But I can tell you're old school.
Well, it's really just the economy of what what drives the
yes,
economy.
exactly. And
I mean, I've seen what you're talking about in
Yes.
Florida or in Gulf Shores,
Yes.
Where
Yes.
you got wave action heights that are, 10, 15 feet and everything's got to be raised. And it's just, not the normal in a piney woods.
Well, it's not normal for us yet because
I get it. Yes, ma'am.
the rules have been set up the wrong way. Because what we need is that kind of development, and to avoid filling in all our floodplains, because every time we fill in a floodplain for a new subdivision, it means we're filling in a floodplain where water used to go, and even if they're doing mitigation, what they're doing is having to go in and tear down the pretty trees that I like, and build ponds and everything instead. So, and the trees are actually very useful for getting the water out of the ground and getting it away from the home. So, you're kind of like in a
Can't
not
argue with the
good-
water cycle. I'm with
Exactly.
you there.
Exactly. So we need to get out of the concept that we have to do everything cheaply up front, because you said that again too a couple of times about, well, we can design it, but can we afford it? Well, can we afford to keep having to rebuild homes or people losing their homes? Because right now, that's who's paying for this poor design, is the people whose homes are being flooded and businesses are being flooded repeatedly. And they should not have to keep paying for the mistakes of others. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with the changes here, is that when someone comes in and develops and builds, they do it in an intelligent way. They're going to do it raised, and they're not going to put cement everywhere to stop the water, because when you lay down cement, it also causes more flooding from all the runoff. So putting in permeable roads and things like that help the water go through instead of off would slow down flooding for other neighborhoods and the neighborhood there that's being built. So what we need to do is look at a new way of thinking things. It's not really a new way, because as Dr. Martin pointed out, that's the way homes were built. Do you have any idea when they started allowing slab homes to be built? Of course, it wasn't allowed. There weren't any laws then, I'm sure. But when did they start thinking that building on slab in a floodplain is a good idea? What idiot thought that up?
I cannot answer that question. I would assume most of New York was built in floodplain.
Yeah, but New York's not in a muddy floodplain. Because when you started out, I was very hopeful because you talked about the Florida parishes all
Right.
being kind of similar. And that's true to a point if you look at how they're divided. The northern half of the Florida parishes are hill country, and they do flood.
That's right.
But it drains pretty quickly.
Yep.
When you get down here, guess what? We're at the bottom of the muck.
flat
and
like a
this is
pancake.
flat. And
Yes.
yeah, we don't drain quickly. If the lake's full, which it usually is after a bad storm or anything, there's nowhere for the water to drain to. So we're stuck, and we don't get this nice, the rain comes and floods and then leaves and then more rain comes. We get rain and flooding and the water backing in from the lake all at the same time. So you're talking about a very special scenario and a very bad scenario for homeowners and business owners whose homes are going to keep flooding and flood more if we keep building the way we're building now and allowing what's little left of the floodplains to be filled in and not allow for more drainage. Because we could dig the Tchefuncte as deep as the Mississippi River, and it's still not going to be able to handle 30 inches in a 24-hour rain,
That's
And
true.
when the lake's full especially, there's no way the water's going anywhere. You can dig it all you want, but it's not going to go anywhere if there's nowhere for it to go. And so looking at building the way we've been building is really unintelligent and not something we can keep doing going forward if we don't want to have more flooding and more new subdivisions flooding and more old subdivisions flooding, because we need to do something different, obviously. What we've been doing hasn't worked. And like you said, the affordable part of it, I'm like, well, who's going to pay for it, though? You said, yeah, you're responsible, but then you said, but acts of God. And unfortunately, all the flooding issues tend to be acts of God. So who ends up responsible? Well, the taxpayers do, and the
That's right.
insurance
Same as
payers.
fires and earthquakes. You have to pay insurance and you take a risk. Same as car insurance,
Yeah, but I
health
won't move to
insurance.
California.
Yeah, no, I mean, but we pay for insurance because of risks that we take in life, right?
But I do think, we need to recognize the fact that building here needs to be done in a way that's intelligent. And in California now, if you build a big enough building especially, you have to build it according to the design specs so that people don't get hurt in an earthquake as much as is practicable. And that's what we need to do here. We need design specs for people not to be hurt in floods as much as is practicable. But thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Morone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few thoughts. I don't know if there's any other questions for Mr. Ellis, but mine are just kind of some general follow-up thoughts.
No, you're the last one,
Okay.
as of right now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Paul.
Just a couple of thoughts on Jason's comments and also on some of the panel's comments. I've said a couple of times that I think it's important that we strike a balance with whatever regulations the parish has, whatever we end up with. And, that balance has got to take into consideration the practicality of the impact of the regulation. We've talked about affordability. We've talked about a lot of different things. And some of these words, people they have a connotation that people don't like. Well, I mean, why are we worried about somebody's money? But let me give you an example. Car accidents happen all the time. I can fix that. We can pass an ordinance that says you will not drive a car in St. Tammany Parish, and that will stop every car accident from happening in St. Tammany Parish. Now, everybody would say, Mr. Morone's lost his mind. That's not at all reasonable. That's not at all reasonable. And that's my point here. I think that we've got to be very careful that whatever is decided, whatever the parish does beyond this group, that there has to be a balance and it's got to be reasonable. When we talk about building on piers, to me, we're talking about a method of construction, okay? Dr. Martin, who I know believes fervently in that, which I respect, but When we talk about designing, requiring a design where you build on piers, even if somebody had built on piers and they built to just above the base flood elevation, which is what the requirements are, they would have flooded in these events. Now, had they built on piers and gone 10 feet above the base flood elevation, they might not have flooded. But simply building on piers does not answer the question, right? Because if the requirements of St. Tammany Parish and most other municipalities and jurisdictions is that you be above the base flood elevation, well, that's where most of the people are going to build. If you're on Lake Pontchartrain and your base flood elevation is 14 feet above natural grade, you're not bringing in fill. You're building on piers, right? But if you're in a location where you're 8 inches, a foot between being above base flood and natural grade, then in most instances, people are not building on piers. So I think it would be a mistake to suggest that building on piers is the answer to all of the problems that we're all concerned about. And I do think that the affordability or the practicality maybe is a better term. The practicality of the public, not just the developer, but the public being able to comply with whatever regulations we put out has to be considered. That has to be considered. And that's my 2 cents for what I've heard this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Allen.
Yeah, I'd just like to reply to Mr. Marone's comments. And first off, yeah, most people build to the 100-year flood, and if it goes over it, it will flood, which is why FEMA allows more credits for going 2 to 3 feet above base flood elevation. And it's because of errors that we have. But second, when you talk about building on piers to keep people from flooding, you're talking about that individual house. When we're talking about filling in the floodplain, building on fill, we're talking not only about storage, but actual redirection of flow, which will affect all of the neighboring community, not just those people buying those houses. And that's what these ordinances are in place for, to protect the community, not to help developers build in the floodplains. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Margie.
Yeah, but first of all, building in all areas isn't really practicable. We do need areas that are left for drainage, and we need floodplains that are left untouched and allowed to do what God designed them to do, which He did a really good job on, which is to get the water out of the areas and down to the lakes and rivers and bayous. So not all areas should be developed. And I'm definitely not somebody saying people can't develop their land, but the parish should look at buying drainages in areas and hiring somebody. That was a great idea, hiring somebody to be a hydrologist and understand drainages, because we do have areas in St. Tammany Parish that should not be built in, and they need to be left open and wide open so that we do have places for the water to go and get out of here as quickly as we can. And an example, if I lived in Flowers Estates, I would be upset, to say the least, because if you go right now during the winter, you can really see it. If you drive into Flowers Estates and look up towards Pinnacle Parkway, and I'm saying look up because you're looking up at the bases of the houses in Pinnacle Parkway in that new development there. So these people who have lived in Flowers Estates for generations, some of them, now have a dam just south of them that effectively stops the water from going downstream freely, has taken up a bunch of the floodplain. That used to be all open floodplain that flooded. It's now a dam, basically. And the water backed up, like I said before, into Old Covington for the first time in 2016. That was right, the Pinnacle Parkway, I call it the Pinnacle Parkway Dam, but it's there and stopping the water flow and not allowing drainage. And that's not the kind of thing we should be doing. We need to be allowing for drainage out of areas, and Old Covington's going to continue to flood. I really don't know what can be done now to help move the water out of there more quickly. But like I said, there are areas that really shouldn't be developed and that we need to be really careful about if we allow development, that it's done correctly and that we plan it so that it doesn't harm pre-existing homes.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, seeing no one else in the queue, Mr. Ellis, I just want to personally thank you for coming and making a very, very informative presentation. One of the things that we talk about this committee, and I think it's very obvious, that we have a wide diversity of opinions, and that's good. That's absolutely good. And so we're going to take, we're going to move down this road and how we get there and where we end up. It's going to be very interesting, and I'm looking forward to that. But I just wanted to say thank you very much and for your time and your effort. And I made some notes, and I think we should maybe have someone on staff to do that. I don't know where we'll find the money. Maybe we can get some tax money and do that. But we'll go about that later on. But anyway, thank you, sir. Mr. Frugier.
Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to take up too much of your time.
You take your time, sir.
I'm just here to talk about two things real quick. First of all, my name is Toby Frugier. I'm a consulting engineer in Baton Rouge. As Jason mentioned, I'm also the president of the Louisiana Floodplain Managers Association for the state. So that being said, as that role, as being involved in that organization, I have many avenues that, if this committee wants to pursue, I could put y'all in touch with other people who are doing the same thing as y'all, not just in the state, but nationwide, Arkansas, Oklahoma, people that are still, not, way far away, have faced some of the same problems and challenges y'all have. So if y'all want to reach out to LFMA, email us. We have a website. Y'all can contact us. I'll be more than happy to put y'all in touch with, other floodplain managers throughout the state, throughout our area, just to get some opinions, maybe some fresh eyes on the ordinances, just something maybe to, liven it up just to see what other people are doing, even just kind of get some better ideas. It might not be, the worst idea. The other thing I just wanted to mention is, what I'm about to say is probably nothing new to y'all, but floodplain management is tricky. I mean, it's a catch-22. Either you can have no regulations at all, where developers come in and just develop everything, with no regard for, anybody that's already there, or you go the other route where, you have so much regulations where it's just not economical for somebody to develop. Your job is to find that happy medium, and your people, your residents. So you just have to try to, find that balance. The other, I guess, problem is it's not just St. Tammany. You're also kind of competing with your other neighboring parishes. You might go above and beyond on your regulations, and you think you're doing something good for your area, but your neighbors, they might not want to do the same regulations. So economically, instead of spending tax dollars in your parish, they might go to the neighboring parish and develop it because it's cheaper and easier. You have to weigh those ideas too. That's all I wanted to say. If y'all have any questions, I'll be glad to answer some.
Well, first of all, yes, I really would like to get that information, and if we can touch base with some other people on that. That's exactly what this is all about, is to get a lot of information. And secondly, I think you hit the nail right on the head, is what I was saying a little bit earlier. You hear and you hear, and no one is expecting that you're going to go one way all the way or the other. Right. You have to come in the middle and try to figure something out. And I'm a big person right now that's looking just in my own head, nothing to do with this committee, is that we have experts here on both sides, and that's great. But I believe, and that's why I said I'd like to talk to some other people, I believe that sometimes you need someone with a separate set of eyes to come in and to look at it from top to bottom and give you an opinion on how you're doing it and what you should be doing. And right. I'm hopeful that maybe one day this group would sit here and look at that and come with that recommendation. But anyway, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Belva Sarah.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
One of my constraints I've had in my area in this entire parish is that the floodplain maps have not been approved. It's been going on for, what, north of 7 years? What is happening to some of my constituents? They have moved them from a flood zone C to a Z. I had a man who had a house raised in Magnolia Forest off of North Military. I pleaded with this man to take the buyout, eliminate his house and move somewhere else. He decided not to. What I told him was a mistake. He called me last Friday. His insurance company took his policy, had his house elevated to 11 feet before he was 4. They just raised his policy to $2,900 a year because they're using the proposed rate as the law. And it just frustrates me that that could happen when we don't know what is going to be the final map. And everybody I talk to, they keep telling me they don't know.
Right, no, as LFMA, the Floodplain Management Association, we have the same opinions. All these rules and stuff are coming out on the national level. You know, FEMA is trying to figure out the best way, and not just FEMA, but the government. You know, they have all these discussions on how best to rate policies. Is grandfathering a good thing, a bad thing? Do you go to actuarial rates? All these, you know, ideas. And really, Louisiana and Florida are pretty unique in this, in just the way the grandfathering works. All these other states, they don't have the issues we have. They don't have the topography we have. So it's really easy for them to say, you know, no, everybody goes to actuarial rates. You know, just start raising rates. It'll encourage people to raise their houses because in their eyes, that's the best way to do it. Nobody's arguing that raising your house is a bad thing. It's can you afford it? And I think that's what you're touching on. You know, if that person keeps their house where it is, or even after they raise it, $2,800, you know, in flood insurance premiums, you know, a lot of people can't afford that. That's unheard of. And the buyout program, as you mentioned, it's a voluntary program. You can't force somebody to take a buyout. And a lot of people, especially in these southern, you know, areas, they love their community, they love their neighbors, they don't want to leave. So again, it's a tough spot to be in.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Let me see. I know Mr. Burke is not here. He couldn't make it tonight. Dr. Martin?
Yes.
You're up, sir.
I'm up. Well, I want to thank the two gentlemen for talking. I really respect Jason because I've talked to him before and worked on him, and I'm sure the other gentleman is excellent also. My problem with this is we're obviously facing a situation. Should we weaken an ordinance or put a new ordinance in? And we've got an ordinance, and I'm going to ask Jay Watson, the chief engineer here, would the change in the ordinance we have now that we're following at this time, if we changed it, would the change be for as far as the public coming into new areas? Would the change keep them safer, or would the change perhaps be more risky for them? Boy, I'm going to put you on the spot. Sidney's not here. He always dodges that question.
The proposed change would allow for fill mitigation and for the 25% reduction detention requirements to utilize the same volume in the pond. So it would relax the requirements that we have right now.
Okay, so we relax them. Right. And if we kept those, the possibility, in my poor little mind, the possibility of a rain and a flood hitting at approximately the same time, you would be in trouble, as opposed to if you relaxed the regulations and said, well, no, we're not going to get a rain and not going to get a flood, we could use the same place for both storages. Am I understanding it?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate that. I can only echo what a councilman said at the last meeting, and that is, why are we here? St. Tammany Parish has obviously, at this time, I'm for not relaxing the ordinance and keeping the interpretation of it as strong as possible. St. Tammany Parish, my understanding, when it comes to ordinances, if there are two ordinances that contradict each other, the more restrictive one is the one that is followed. And we're sort of in that position here. We're looking to change a stronger ordinance. Now, we know we've got flood problems. Once again, we had 1,000 families flooded in 2016, and we're looking to relax that ordinance. And obviously, at this point, I've heard nothing that convinces me that that ordinance should be relaxed. The other thing that I have in mind is that this ordinance is not an ordinance that fits St. Tammany Parish. It's not a one-size-fits-all ordinance. We have areas in Folsom that are on top of hill. We've got areas where I live, Goodby, which is a flat plain and a flood plain. And certainly there needs to be something done with the ordinance, and I understand that there are flood hazard regulations ordinances. And I would like to see this particular ordinance and the discussion that we're having on this ordinance, I'd like to have that, when we're finished with this, be a springboard to look at our current flood hazard ordinances. And I'm going to show you why I would like to, I've got a 3-minute presentation to show you why I would like to look at it. Don, can you put that on, please? Pretty nifty, huh?
Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe not. No, Don does a good job. He'll figure it out. Now, this is a picture of a development that was built and is being built. The music is also good on it. Here you come. Thank you, Don. All right. This is something for you to. This is a new development in our area.
This is 2016, right?
Yes. Yes. Now, this development is with the current rules being enforced. Most of those houses are unoccupied at the time. You'll see some of them with a car next to it. You notice the garage is about a quarter of the way up the garage. That house would have been flooded. see the water in that house. Thank you. Thank you, Don. Appreciate it. But this is my problem, and this is why I am here working with this committee, because even houses that are being built right now, the rules, the ordinance, the 6066, is insufficient to protect people when they buy houses that aren't even occupied yet. And I really we've got 4 council people here, and these people are here because they care. They care about the flooding. They care about the loss that people sustain. It breaks my heart to see some of these houses after they've been flooded. And, well, I was flooded 3 times, so that's all right. But these people are here, and I think we need to work on this ordinance, but I think we should use this ordinance to look in the future and see if there's something needs to be done special in the floodplains. Now, I know we have ordinances for that, and that's what I'm saying. I think they need to be looked at to protect people, because obviously they're not enough if we're allowing subdivisions to be built that are already flooding before they're not even finished being built. And I think Tangipahoa did a moratorium on building. I don't think a moratorium on building is something that we would like to see. I wouldn't like to see that in St. Tammany Parish. But I do think that we can do some type of moratorium in Tangipahoa. But I think we could do some type of moratorium on building in a floodplain until we get a chance to relook at some of our requirements for building in a floodplain. Because obviously, even with this being strong and the ones we have on the book for floodplain building is not adequate at all. And I would like to see, hopefully, somebody put forward the idea, not here, not now, but someone put forward the idea of a moratorium on anybody building a development that has any part in the flood zone until we get this figured out and find a way that we can both build in flood zones, but build in flood zones safely for the people that are involved. Thank you.
Thank you. I would, Mr. Schoen, okay? Mr. Morone. Jeff's name came up on that.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few follow-up comments. I think it's important to note that we've heard a couple of times people ask, wait, why are we here? There's been discussions about, well, are we changing the ordinance? Are we relaxing the ordinance? I think if you read the ordinances today as they exist, the detention ordinance and the fill mitigation ordinance, my understanding of those ordinances is that they do not say that you can't use the pond for fill mitigation. It doesn't say that. And I think that was the point of the request from planning and engineering, I think, was for clarification, because just a plain reading of it, it's at least not clear. I'll say that. And so I don't say that, I don't mention that for any other reason other than whatever decision this committee comes to. We need to make sure that the directive is clear. Because I think just saying, well, don't relax the regulations, I think that would lead to more confusion, because I think there needs to be some clarity in the language to help the staff and the development community and everybody to have a clear understanding. Because right now, like I said, the language, Mr. Watson may read it to say one thing, but I think a fair reading by me, I could get a different interpretation. I think we want to make sure that whatever we come out of this with, there's good clarity for everybody. So that's just, I wanted to make sure that's clear.
Perfect. I wasn't going to go down this road right now, but we will because we own it. And I agree we need some clarification on the ordinance that we have in place. And it needs to be stricter and that we have. So I reviewed it, and I have a couple of amendments that I'm not going to propose them tonight. I was going to save them for next week, but I'll throw them out just so everybody can think about them tonight. And that if you would look in 115-30, paragraph F, you'll see the wording, said storage capacity may be utilized to meet the fill mitigation requirements. I scratched out may and put shall not. Now, why should it shall? Let me go back before I even move further. In my previous profession, the word shall means a lot more than the word may, and I've used it to my advantage a few times. So sometimes other people get a benefit out of something. So, make a long story short, I inserted shall not in F-I-E, F-I-E and F again, and I put the word shall not. Now, what does that do? That does exactly what Mr. Marone just said, and also Dr. Martin. It gives clarity to the ordinance. I cannot go to Mr. Watson and say, Mike Lorino did it 3 years ago, and now I want to do it. And he's in a bind. But if it says shall not, there is no one going to go to Mr. Watson and say, that's the way we need to do this. It's cut and dry. So I'm just going to mention that for tonight and for everybody to think about it, but I will come at the next meeting with an official amendment to it, and then we can go there. Now, let's say hypothetically that that passes and that's in place. I'm going to go back to Dr. Martin. I agree 1,000%, and I said it earlier. I believe there's more to this than that. But it's not to say it's got to be totally restrictive. It's to say you have to sit down and take everyone's ideas and put them there and try to work together and have something. And I'm going to say it again. I'm a councilman. There's 3 other councilmen here. There's attorneys, there's developers, there's everybody. But I believe, and I'm going to bring this up also, that we should hire or try to find the money to hire an outside person to come in and to listen to everyone that's here and take the personalities out of it. You can't dredge, you can't do this, you can't do this, you have to do this. Everybody has their little bit of a niche. Everybody. Not just one. But bring someone in that will listen to all those niches and then come back and say, here's what we have. You're doing good here, you're doing bad here, bump, 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 bump. And then we can come back again and sit down and say, okay, here's what we have, let's try to work it out. I'll probably be bringing that up also at the next meeting. So I wasn't going to go down to this until you know, you kind of, I thought you were just going to play your video, but you got me started, which is okay. I like it, that's fine. But I was prepared anyway, you see. So the bottom line is, I think that's probably the best way, because Sydney, Jay, they cannot be on the spot. They need clarification, as Mr. Marone said, and but we also need to look at everything involved. and I believe we can do that. So that's what I'm going to say for tonight, and I'm going to shut up. Ms. Margie.
That's great, Mike. Definitely a good way to move. I think everybody feels like the ordinance needs to be stricter, not more or less restrictive. I wanted to ask John, too, the homes in that subdivision, the ones that were, well, not the ones that were flooded, all of them, have they been moved into the newer home, the ones that you said a lot of them were empty? Have they sold a bunch of those, do you know? Are the people warned? I mean, is there some kind of heads up?
I asked one person, and they said that they were told that there was minor flooding. I mean, that's
wow.
You know, that's your own impression.
Yeah.
Minor flooding can be, you know, the roof was still okay. So no, that's the only thing I know, and I know. Once again, I had said from the people that lived on McGee, one of the ladies asked, has this house ever flooded? And the real estate agent told him no. Well, the house was just built. And it flooded, you know, but it had never, he answered honestly, it had never flooded because it was just built. And, you know, it's a problem, and I wasn't insinuating that they have a moratorium on building in St. Tammany Parish. I was insinuating that they have a moratorium on building if any part of a development is in the floodplain, just that type of building until we can get this ironed out.
Yeah. I'd be very upset if I bought a house there and they told me there was minor flooding, and then I find out that it flooded, you know, a few feet up the driveway. It's like not good. I wanted to mention to you, though, I met in D.C. early last year. I was trying to remember his name, and I found it, thank goodness. David Conrad. He's a water resources policy consultant, and he's an independent consultant on federal water policy. And he was on the Association of State Floodplain Managers. He was one of the guys helping make decisions. And he told me, it was just not just me, it was a small group of us met with him. And he told us, you know, the National Flood Insurance Program, and this isn't a big secret, is going to go down. It can't afford these homes that keep going under and have to be stripped out and repaired. And then again, and he said it's only a matter of time. And he said people are complaining about the rates, but the only thing that's going to keep the program afloat at all is increased rates. And if we don't increase the rates, it's going to go down sooner. And he said it's written in blood, basically. It is going to go down. So all of these homes that are being built with the idea like, oh, well, get flood insurance because you're going to be, you know, you're going to need it. What happens when there's no more flood insurance program? What happens to these people then who have bought these homes in that subdivision, for example, and then get flooded again and have no no flood insurance? Or as he said, you'll be able to get flood insurance. It'll be part of a homeowner's package, and you're going to be paying through the nose for it. So, and people who can't afford the flood insurance now are not going to be able to afford private flood insurance. So we're talking about a disaster coming on us. It's going to happen. And if we don't start doing something now, we're going to have more and more places that are going to be in this problem area. And you know, it's like this is intelligent. Making it shall not so that there's no misinterpretation is wonderful. But we really do need to look at something much broader and wider and to stop this bad development from happening.
Well, Margie, that's exactly what I said when we were going to bring in someone to look at all these ideas that everyone has and put them down there. Gene?
One of the things that has me concerned, and it's only because of Mike, Lorene, and I were looking at something, and we were appointed to go to the Fire Chiefs Association meetings on a monthly basis, and it was an eye-opener for us. One of the things that came up is when subdivisions are being developed, you know, everything gets approved paperwork-wise through the Planning Commission, the drawings are signed off, and then they go forward. What I need to find an answer on, along with this ordinance, is the builders abiding by the data as a part of the approved subdivision plan. because one of the reasons I'm broaching this is that there are subdivisions where the fire hydrants are not above ground to what was on the approved plan. You'll see fire hydrants where the grass level is right below the top of the fire hydrant, where the stench piece comes out. And that shouldn't be. And I'm saying to myself, is there anything else that was not watched close enough to make sure that that type of thing doesn't happen? So if we get someone to look at this, I want to also see them start saying from the time subdivision approval is finished until the homes are sold, did everybody do their job to make sure everything is as built and not modified from what as built was supposed to be?
Thank you, Jim. Seeing no one else, I'd like to go to the public and see if anyone would like to come up. Please just, yes, sir. Y'all can just come on up and order that for me. You take your time, sir. Just state your name and address for me.
David Campbell, 11082 Garden Lane, Folsom. Thank you very much. I think this is just a great idea. We wanted to add a couple of things in the record that you will be building for your task force committee. And one that I would start out with was I could give you files that I've kept. I'm the founder and the first president of the Little Tchefuncte River Association. We founded that organization about 30 years ago. I'm on the board of the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation and the Land Trust for Louisiana. So we hear a lot of things like this. And when Kevin Davis was still president of the parish, he agreed to put on the ballot a conservation tax. It was very modest, it was very small, but to give us an alternative tool for problem lands that the owner wants to make a buck on it, but it floods all the time, and maybe it's just 50 feet from the Tchefuncte River and in the low part, but it did not pass. It looked good until the very end. So since we don't have that, I'm a little surprised that I haven't heard from anyone tonight the words Louisiana Watershed Initiative. That is, of course, where $1.2 billion has been allocated solely for the state of Louisiana. And I don't know how many of you have been keeping up, but the Louisiana Watershed Initiative just completed its listening tour. It's developing policies. I know that on the staff they are. They're developing policies that, how intelligent, just like, floods don't respect jurisdiction lines, the parish lines. When we design, we're talking about a lot the Tchefuncte. So one of the gifts that we've brought you all, maybe for your child or grandchild or neighbor, because these are all small, but I'm going to take the top one.
That'll fit me. That'll be fine.
And these are really nice T-shirts, too, I'll tell you. It's
Ben.
the Little Tchefuncte River Association.
Thank you.
And on the back, it says, Scenic River, Save Our Squiggle.
Thank you.
We did these a long time ago, but if you look closely at the map on the front that we had designed, it's really quite helpful in understanding the floodplain, particularly of the Tchefuncte, because it's one of the few that we were able to get together and put together that shows the river, the streams, and the roads and how they intersect. The other thing I want to give you as a gift, and I'm sorry I don't have one for each of you because I'm about sold out, but I do want to enter into the record the book that I published year before last, which is Nature All Around Us, 50 Years of Life with Creatures and Native Plants in Louisiana, a book of art and poetry. Now the reason I think it's relevant to you and what you're doing is that, like Mr. Belva Sarah mentioned, that his district's built out. When I bought my first acreage, and I built it up to larger acreage than the two subdivisions that want to build 500 homes south of us. We're at the Little Tchefuncte, just right below Highway 1078. And we're at 65 feet above sea level. And for 50 years, I've watched the river, and I know now, we know instantly when everybody below us is getting flooded, like Spring Lakes. Like Margie mentioned, there are so many factors. If the winds are blowing a certain way so that the lake is backed up, we see the Little Tchefuncte River beginning to rise. If it rains, we may not get a drop of rain south of Folsom, but if north of Folsom they got 12 inches, we're going to see that river rise. And we've graphed, we know when a certain piece on our property is going to flood through empirical knowledge now, keeping journals and so forth. And the subdivisions, you know, one house or two houses is one thing, but subdivisions of 100, 200, 300, 500 are something else, with all of the impermeability that comes with it, with all the roofs, with all the, you know, everything that comes with it. I do believe in my heart, and I've been involved in these issues for nearly 50 years, that we were talking about Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. I believe that locally and nationally and globally, we have reached the tipping point. And thank goodness for your task force committee, because we are going to have to build smarter in the future. We need to look forward, we look back for our data, but forward to do better. In my view, we shouldn't be bringing in this Washington Parish and Mississippi clay, you know, to start with our subdivisions. When they do a subdivision, it's rule number one, first kill all nature. First kill all of God's other creations. Now, my book talks about, and I want you just, and I'll donate it to you, maybe you can pass it around.
Please try to.
Sure. What I am talking about the destruction of nature.
No, I understand,
Yeah.
but we have a
So
lot of
things
people.
like barred owls and blue-tailed skinks and cardinal flowers and chanterelles and fireflies and foxfire and green anoles and hummingbird moths and longleaf pine, moles and voles and et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that the ordinance, if anything, must be made clear. I certainly understand Mr. Barone and all developers. I wish to have it clear. But I think that it needs to be stricter, because it ain't going to get better in the future. It is going to get worse. And someone pointed out, we're just waiting to see what's going to happen with all that fill at Pinnacle Parkway. The most important thing I want to give you for your record, and I apologize, I've had computer problems and printer problems. I only have one copy. But more than 2 years ago, Goodby Civic and Little Tchefuncte River got together, and we started drawing up a specific floodplain ordinance for our floodplain, the Tchefuncte floodplain. We look at it as Highway 1077 and the Little Tchefuncte River. You know, that's our corridor. We spent hours and hours on this. While I introduce it into your evidence, or whatever you want to call it, your exhibits, this is not a finished document, but it has about 30 whereases, and it's the whereases that you want to, they are the reasons why the ordinance should be strengthened. So it doesn't end, what happened is that we presented this, we're going to take one step at a time to see if we could get a special overlay zoning district for us. Sydney and the staff said, we're not interested in specific overlay districts. Well, that was fine. We just didn't think we could take on the whole parish, but that's good that now you are. So this could be sort of a model. It was a working model. You will see that it's not finished at the end. But it is something that, and I only have the one copy, but you could maybe make copies make sure that they all get a copy later, and I apologize for that.
Thank you.
So it does address the very issues that you are concerned with. And just in closing, I would say that, yes, 50 years ago, I bought my first 13 and a half acres on the upper reaches of Little Chifunk. There was no road to it. It was totally undeveloped. Over time, yes, we built it up to over 100 acres. And everything we built, even though we had never, ever been flooded at those 65 foot above sea level, we did year before last, along with everybody south of us, in one of our cabins. We have Little River Bluffs Nature Preserve and Retreat cabin rental bed and breakfast on the bluffs of this spot, the Little Chifunk. So good, you guys, for doing what you're doing. We're really appreciative of your work. It's very serious, a very serious issue that you're dealing with. And I think here's a great opportunity. I think President Brister and all who are responsible for this expect something good going to come out of this, something enlightened, something that's looking to the future. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. I just want to touch on the watershed. I see Margie has hers, but I'll go ahead and do it. The parish went and participated there and listened, and also they were going to come and make a presentation tonight, but they couldn't get here tonight, so they may make it next month. So we're following it very close.
You're talking about the watershed?
Yes, sir.
I made an objection to them that they were closing their listening tour, and I said, we are the fastest growing parish in the state, and you haven't been to our parish.
Well, they're coming. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
I might not have a dog in the hunt, but I do live in St. Tammany Parish. Name's Don Castile. Live at 82050 Beeler Road on top of a hill. I do not want to see people's homes flooded. I'll probably misquote Alexander Hamilton. He said, "Why did we form a government in the first place? Because the passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason." I think it's rather unreasonable to say we can't build on piers. That makes no sense to me. And also, we have a strange addiction to having subsurface drainage when that's not necessary. We can use other drainage, and it can be done in a pretty way. But continuing to do the same old thing when people's homes, 1,000 people's homes was flooded, it could be a lot worse. I think we really need to strengthen these rules, and we need to look at the whole picture. And your idea about hiring someone to come sit in and see over it, or maybe a panel of 3 even, I think that could help. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
While he's coming up, I meant to say that this acreage.
That's fine. We go ahead. Thank you.
On piers, even though we didn't have to. That's
Yes, sir.
The Attorney General conversation.
Yeah.
My name is Michael Champagne. I live at 146 North Ridge Drive off of Highway 1077. And whether Jason intended to say this or to mean this or not, he made a very pointed comment. He can design a subdivision in a box. Well, guess what? Once that last period's put on those drawings, and it's like Mr. Belisario says, what happens after that? Where's the enforcement? Where's the follow-up? Spring Lakes was obviously designed in a box. And when those floods came, those people were scurrying out there to put more fill on those lots so those houses wouldn't flood. And what's happening around here, it's up to the residents to to watchdog these developers. He had to watchdog Spring Lakes as to where it was putting its runoff, in which ditches and which pipes it was going in. There's people on Bunny Lane working at night because code enforcement can't come out on Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. And I mean, the people should not have to worry about that enforcement. And whatever balance we strike with all of this, we need to favor the residents of this parish, and I believe everybody in this room will agree with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Excuse me, good evening, everyone. Mike Stack, 76045 Tantella Ranch Road, and that is in the Goodby area. I am the proud owner of a slab-on-fill home on Tantella Ranch Road that flooded in March of 2016. Previous to that, we lived in a, as you say, pier and beam home on that was on 1085 Bootlegger Road, which was subject to the soap and tallow branch. We never flooded there. So just a little history there. Anyhow, I appreciate what's going on here, and I think that you know, we need to look at this thing not in a parochial way, but very comprehensively, and keep up the good work. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Well, seeing anyone else? Well, seeing no one else and no one in the queue. Yes, sir. Come on. Come on. No need to hide in the corner. Come on.
You've seen the pictures of Spring Lakes. I live a half a mile closer to the river, straight closer to the river.
I'm sorry, would you state your name for the record?
I'm Steve Pierce. I live on Ark Road, 12387 Ark Road.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, I live a half a mile closer to the river from Spring Lakes, half a mile closer. I'm 3 blocks high. I had to rethink my insulation. It's at the bottom of my joists. My house didn't flood. And my land, I'll tell you, my land's even lower than Spring Lakes, and my house didn't flood. God, I think maybe Spring Lakes backed it up or something. I don't even understand how that could have happened because I'm lower. My land's a lot lower than Spring Lakes. Water didn't go, it went on through. Water went on through. I seen it. It went through there like a speed demon. You go over Spring Lakes, it slowed down. There was something different, something funny went on there because that dirt level is probably as high as my floor in my house. My house didn't flood, and it's 3 blocks high. 3 blocks high. And as far as builders, this is going to be controversial. Builders don't want to change. They want to put dirt, put a slab. They don't want to change. And they're going to use their power to try to convince you that they're just going to leave. We're not going to build in this parish. The people want to be here. They will build in this parish. If they don't build in this parish, somebody else will. And they'll build it on beams and piers. Because people want to live here. It's not about the builder. Yeah, the builder, they can leave. And they're going to threaten that. They're going to threaten leaving. We won't build here. We're going to economically destroy St. Tammany Parish. No, they won't. Because the people want to live here. You got I-12. You got these schools coming in. You got development that people want to come to. They're going to come, and they're going to live on houses on piers where the water can go right underneath it, just like it did in my house. Now, my house is going to flood. It's just a matter of time, I believe, because I didn't go but 3 blocks high. But the thing is, my biggest fear, if you take a hole that a river runs through, and you take half of that hole, or just use half, and you put a mountain on it, and then you put a pond on the top of that mountain, and you take a pipe and aim it in one direction towards somebody's house, and you try to tell them, oh, 25% less water. Tell that to the people that pipe's aimed towards, because they're going to take a hind end whipping. And I'll tell you something else. All you got to do is the post hole digger test. All these engineers in here, you go over to that land at Spring Lakes before that dirt fill was put in there, and you dig down 1.5 feet deep, and guess what? That hole fill half up of water. But you go over there to Spring Lakes on a 2.5 foot pile of dirt, you dig down 1.5 feet deep, that hole won't fill up with water. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the water that would normally subside into that land does not subside into that land. And where does that 25% less water come in when there's no water subsiding into that land? That 25% less water, to me, and I'm a layman. You said something about layman terms the last time. I'm Mr. Layman standing right here. I'm Mr. Layman. And this is not complicated to me. I mean, yeah, it's complicated when you make it complicated, but it's not that complicated. If they fill that hole half up with a mountain and shoot all that water into that hole, my house is going under. My house is going under. And I'm telling you, it didn't take no water. I had to change my insulation. I had to change the way I thought my insulation. Insulation was at the bottom of my joists. Now it's not. It's not the bottom of the joists no more. Because I ain't crawling under the house no more. No, there's no way. But these builders do not have St. Tammany Parish by their throat. They don't. They don't. And if we'll fight, we'll bring builders in that will build raised houses. They'll come. Because you know what it's about? It's about the Benjamins. They want the Benjamins, and they don't care if it's a raised house or a slab house. But they just don't want to change. I don't want to change neither. Nobody likes change. You hear a politician change, and it's like, what the heck they're talking about? Nobody likes change. They'll build raised houses on piers. And we have the power to do that if we'll do it. Maybe not me, I'm not as smart as they are, but they got big lawyers and all, but that you guys can change this. And you've seen Spring Lakes. That was great. That was great. Beautiful. That was a work of art. There was some serious backpedaling too. I know, I got it all. I got people figured, there are different people looking at different ways here. But when that Spring Lakes pictures came up, look, it's time to start backpedaling because that's what they're doing. And they're doing that to the people that they're leaving in the hole too. The people that they're putting in a hole, they're doing that to them too. Maybe worse.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing no one else, you sure no one else wants to? I enjoyed it. You're not a layman, let me tell you. I can tell you that. But thank you all very much. I really appreciate everyone taking the time and coming tonight, and we'll let you know when the next meeting is. It'll probably be a month. So thank you, and have a safe trip back home. Yes, he did a real good job. He's a good engineer. He was. Sean said he was coming, and they didn't show up.
I saw him Friday
He told me he was coming.
Yeah, two things. Two things he did. One, and he was doing on a completely different thing on the recreation. I was going, Sean, where were you? I don't know. Here's your pen.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Yes, exactly. Who's at the bar?
He's the guy we have to deal with. I live over the Coopy. They're the civic trustee.
I love it, but he's so right on that. Oh, yeah. Just noticing, oh man, nobody, contractors we have here, the president of the slabs that they're going to pick up, there'll be a line for them to get in here to build houses here. And they'll raise the prices a little bit, and people will buy them. And they'll probably buy more of them. They'll say, this isn't going to flood. You know, I see all sides, and this isn't some type of magic. Why are we building fill and slab? Know how to do it? They got the system down, cheaper. Make more money. Yep. Just as simple as that. You know, what's her name there? Margie. I like Margie fine, but I'm tired of her saying, trying to equate intelligence. We need intelligence. We're doing no. These contractors aren't dumb. They're smart as hell. Oh, yeah. And from their angle, what are they doing? They're being smart. They're being intelligent. They're making every damn buck they can. And until we tell them they can't do it, they're going to do it. That's smart. It's got nothing to do with intelligence. I understand what you're saying. Intelligent building for the area. Site specific. I think maybe that needs to be included. You know, if he wants to go site specific, well, we can have site specific spots where they're going to be on piers.
Yeah. One of the problems we ran into with the parish a number of years ago, previous engineers we had took a look at the development. We did look at the development. It would make the rules, and you look at the development and the impact it's going to have on the sewer. And all we're doing is concentrating here. If that fails,
yeah, Jason's box. Build it in the box, and what's outside the box, well, hell may be to pay, but, you know. Yeah. So you just incentivize national government. If people aren't doing the right thing, you incentivize it to make money. Maybe we could lower the fees if you put them on fees. Maybe we could, you know, might be a little costly, but it would balance out that. We could, whatever taxes, whatever warranty they have to put up, maybe we could lower if they put them on pickers. To where when they look at the gold pickers, bean count's like, it's about a push.
Yeah.
Thank you.